Hi, we've had some questions sent in to Study Active, and I'm going to try the best I can to answer some of those questions. The first one we have is all about posture muscle imbalance. So we've been asked what are the most common muscle imbalances, the most common postural imbalances, and how might we go about addressing those imbalances. So this is really going to come into the world of personal training and how you actually approach your client in terms of putting them in a better position, but it's going to cross over maybe a little bit into the world of therapy, of sports massage, where we can also address some of these issues. But in terms of common postures, I'd like to refer to the work of a guy called Dr. Vladimir Janda. Now, Janda really is sort of seen by many as the father of rehabilitative science. So he was a neurologist who identified what he described as the most common muscle imbalances. I had the privilege actually many years ago, I think in the late 90s, of actually seeing Dr. Janda at a conference in Bournemouth, a chiropractic conference, and a very brilliant man. Now, I'd like to refer to my whiteboard here if I can, and we've drawn a rather elegant picture here to describe some of these muscle imbalances. So these would be referred to as upper cross syndrome and lower cross syndrome. So let's deal with upper cross syndrome first of all. So basically, upper cross syndrome is when we have, and we'll all be able to relate to this, I'm sure, to some degree, when we have a rounding occurring in the mid-back in the thoracic spine, in the thoracic region of the spine. And we can see that there drawn on the diagram. Now, this may be for many reasons: poor sitting posture, slouching, all of those things that many of us do. So what actually happens is that we round our back. Now, you can see that puts my head in a rather unfortunate position. I'm looking at the ground, so I've got to look up. So I round through the mid-back. I then have to adjust and make that adjustment. And you can see straight away, and actually, that feels a bit tight. As soon as I do that, I have to adjust my head position accordingly. So what we get is a rounding in the mid-back, and we get a forward head carriage. So here, and I'm slightly forward. And I can see that I'm cramping up that area in the cervical spine, which would actually result in loading of the joints in that spine, greater loading of the facet joints in the cervical spine, discomfort and pain. So some of the things that we would actually see with this, well, we might see quite a lot of neck pain, neck and shoulder pain, and discomfort and tightness. We also might get some headaches in this situation because we're actually cramping up that area. There's an area at the base of the skull called the suboccipital region. The suboccipital muscles, these get very tight, and they can actually cause some headaches, some tension headaches. So that's upper cross syndrome, a rounding here, a forward head carriage. What does that mean in terms of muscles? What it means is that we get some very tight muscles here in the cervical region. They would be the upper trapezius muscles, also the levator scapular muscles. You may have heard of those muscles. Also, what we tend to see is a shortening up of the pecs, of the pec major and of the pec minor. And we then see that closing in of the chest. We want to open people up a little bit, clearly. Okay, so we also, here in the mid-back, we'll see some, as we round, we'll see some lengthening of the muscles. The mid-traps, the rhomboids, these kind of muscles will be lengthened, and they tend to be weaker as a result. Upper cross syndrome. We'll come back to it and talk more about it. We also get lower cross syndrome. Often we get the two combined, actually, but lower cross syndrome is where we see an excessive lordosis, hollowing out of the low back, which, as we can see here, tends to tilt my pelvis forwards. Now, that has implications as well in terms of muscles. Again, patterns of tight muscles and patterns of weak muscles. So we're going to get some tight muscles here in the low back area. We may get some low back pain. Again, greater loading of the joints in that area, which could create discomfort. We're going to see some tightness very importantly, in some muscles here, and I didn't do a little red squiggly line, so apologies for that, but we could have a little red squiggly line in here, and that would show that we get some tightness, some shortening of hip flexor muscles, the iliopsoas muscles, made up of the psoas and the iliacus muscles. So these are going to get short and tight, and they're going to pull that pelvis forward. Now, in terms of weakness created by that situation, we can see that as that pelvis tilts forwards, we're stretching out our glutes and our hamstrings. And these will become stretched and lengthened, in other words, and weak. So we can see, again, and also we tend to see some weakness in the abdominal muscles as well, which are also going to be lengthened in that situation. So now we need to talk about how we actually are going to address those things. What things do we need to perhaps stretch, to lengthen, to address that tightening, and what things do we need to activate, to contract, to actually address some of the weakness that exists in those syndromes?